Today we uncover the shocking truth about UK supermarket steaks. Because if there is one product most people still buy on instinct, it is steak. People see ribeye, sirloin, matured, butcher's selection, and they think they already know what they are getting. They assume somebody else already filtered out the bad one for them. But what if that is exactly the mistake? After the horsemeat scandal, the British public was supposed to become more careful with meat, not less. We were supposed to learn that a tidy presentation is not proof, that a label is not the same thing as trust, and that the supermarket aisle can make weak products look safer than they really are. But in 2026, a lot of that old misplaced confidence has quietly come back. Only now it is being sold in a smarter way. Through premium language, through colour, through marinated convenience doing all the persuading before the meat itself has earned anything. And that is why this matters. Because steak disappointment is rarely dramatic enough to make the news. It just keeps happening quietly in kitchens all over the country. The expensive tray that shrinks down fast, the ribeye that eats drier than it should, the thin rump that turns leathery with barely any margin for error, the marinated steak that tastes loud but still feels weak underneath, the stir-fry strips that ask for trust while revealing almost nothing. None of it sounds scandalous on its own, but put it together and you start to see a pattern. A lot of supermarket steak is being sold on confidence first, quality second. So we have gone through the major steak products currently sold in UK supermarkets, and we will expose the 9 supermarket steaks you need to avoid. Then, by the end, you will know exactly why some trays fail, how the packaging lowers your guard, and what signs should make you put the product straight back on the shelf. But first, hit that hype button right now, because every hype helps this video reach more people. And the more people see it, the harder it gets for supermarkets to keep relying on presentation over performance. If you are tired of labels doing more work than the beef itself, if you are tired of paying for reassurance and getting regret, and if you think the lesson from horsemeat should not have been forgotten this quickly, hype the video, share it around, and let us make some noise. Right, let's get into it. Number 9. Tesco Finest Ribeye. This is the pack people reach for when they want to avoid regret. Thicker tray, darker label, a richer name, maybe a little note about careful sourcing or expert selection. Spend more once, avoid disappointment later. That is the story anyway. Then the pan hits the hob, the fat starts to run, and the whole thing can shrink down faster than the price tag prepared you for. That is why Tesco Finest Ribeye belongs here. Not because every single one is inedible, and not because buying a premium supermarket steak is automatically foolish, but because this is exactly the kind of product that relies on relief. It sells the feeling that somebody else already filtered out the bad one for you, yet plenty of buyers still end up describing the same miserable result. Smaller than expected once cooked, less marbling than the word ribeye suggests, and a chew that feels strangely stubborn for something dressed up as a treat. The problem with a steak like this is not only the eating quality, it is the emotional contract. When a budget tray disappoints, people shrug and move on. When an expensive one does it, the whole purchase feels misleading. You did not only pay for beef, you paid for reassurance. The black packaging, the finest language, the premium shelf position, all of it implied a certain level of care. If the result still comes out ordinary or worse, then the extra money was doing more work in the shopper's head than it was doing in the pan. That is what makes premium supermarket steak so slippery. It rarely fails in a dramatic way, it just quietly underdelivers while charging for peace of mind. You are left trying to decide whether you got unlucky or whether the whole tray was leaning on branding from the start. That uncertainty is useful to the retailer. It keeps the buyer from drawing a hard conclusion. They tell themselves next time will be better, and that should tell you something important straight away. In the modern supermarket, price is not always a quality signal. Sometimes it is just a confidence signal. It is there to lower your guard. That sounds small, but it changes the whole aisle. Because once one of the more expensive steaks starts looking unreliable, the cheaper trays stop looking humble and start looking like a different kind of trap. Number 8. Morrison's Standard Steak. A lot of people don't go looking for excellence on an ordinary weekday. They just want something decent. A plain steak, a bag of potatoes, maybe some greens, and a dinner that feels better than another ready meal. That is where the standard supermarket lines come in. They are sold as the sensible middle ground, and that is exactly why Morrison's standard steak is worth talking about. This kind of tray survives on low expectations. Nobody buys it imagining a steakhouse experience. The danger is more subtle than that. Buyers often talk about these middle-tier steaks as if they are serviceable until they actually eat them. Then the same complaints surface again and again. Muted flavour, a dry finish, a texture that gives you work without much reward, and that nagging feeling that the money would have gone further on almost anything else in the meat cabinet. What makes a product like this frustrating is that it borrows the language of simplicity while hiding the consequences of compromise. It looks plain, which makes it seem honest. But plain is not the same thing as straightforward. A steak can be unglamorous and still be weak. It can be ordinary and still be a poor buy. In fact, some of the most disappointing purchases happen right in that middle zone because shoppers stop asking questions there. They save their suspicion for bargain bins and save their hope for special occasion cuts. The everyday tray sneaks through untouched. There is also a strange psychology to this kind of purchase. Because the steak is not especially cheap and not especially premium, people assume it must at least be balanced. They imagine they are avoiding both extremes. But balance only matters if the product actually delivers something in return. If the flavour is thin and the bite is dry, then the middle price point was not wisdom, it was camouflage. And once you notice that, the next issue gets even harder to ignore because sometimes the problem is not the tier, it is the name of the cut itself. Number 7. Asda ribeye. There are certain words in a supermarket that do a lot of work before you ever open the packet. Ribeye is one of them. People hear it and think juicy, forgiving, rich, hard to ruin. It is the cut that promises pleasure even to people who are not especially confident with timing. That reputation is powerful. It lets a weak tray coast a long way on memory. Then you get home, cook it carefully, and end up wondering why something so famously generous ate like a chore. That is the problem buyers keep running into with standard Asda ribeye. It is not that every tray fails in the same way. It is that the name creates a cushion the meat cannot always support. When ribeye lacks that lush softness people expect, when the marbling looks thin, patchy, or oddly mean, the whole purchase starts to feel like a lesson in how much one word can influence judgment. The cut name carries the trust. The actual eating experience sometimes arrives late and underprepared. This matters because supermarkets know the emotional hierarchy of meat better than shoppers realise. They know which words sound safe. They know which cuts have a built-in glow. A shopper who would hesitate over a random steak might relax the second they read ribeye. And once that relaxation sets in, they stop interrogating the thickness, the fat distribution, the colour, the overall feel of the tray. The name has already done the convincing. None of that means the product is fake. It means the comfort attached to the label can get ahead of the evidence. After the Horsemeat scandal, that should have been the one habit people broke for good. Not blind panic, not permanent paranoia, just the simple refusal to let a neat description do all the thinking. Because if even a reassuring cut can leave people underwhelmed, then the next step down the ladder deserves even more skepticism, not less. Number 6. Aldi Butcher's Selection Value Steak. This is where a lot of people tell themselves a practical story. It is only dinner. It is only one night. It does not need to be perfect. That thinking sounds reasonable right up until the knife goes in and the meat folds like damp cardboard or tightens into something that feels more like an obstacle than a meal. The value range steak is not always a disaster, but it has a habit of turning low expectations into low returns. The main problem is usually visible before the pack even leaves the shelf. These steaks are often thin, lean in the wrong way, and missing the kind of marbling that gives ordinary cooking some forgiveness. There is so little margin in them that one extra minute can turn supper into punishment. Yet they still get bought because the low price sends a comforting message. Even if it is not great, it is only a small gamble. That sounds smart until you remember that a bad cheap steak does not become good value just because it costs less. It becomes money spent on disappointment. There is another thing people forget with these trays. Small cuts do not only cook faster, they lose moisture faster, surrender flavor faster, and leave less room for recovery if the timing is even slightly off. So the buyer ends up doing more, watching more carefully, and getting less reward. That is a poor trade. What makes this category so revealing is that it shows how often the supermarket relies on ticket price to settle the argument. If the number looks modest enough, people forgive what they would not forgive elsewhere. They excuse the thinness. They excuse the lack of richness. They excuse the weak eating quality as if the lower cost already answered every complaint. It does not. It just lowers the standard in advance. And once that habit becomes normal, the aisle finds another way to dress up weak meat. Not by cutting the price, but by coating the problem in flavour before you can judge it properly. Number 5, Sainsbury's marinated steak. Sometimes the warning sign is not blandness, it is noise. A tray covered in pepper glaze, barbecue dressing, sticky garlic coating, smoky herbs, or some glossy liquid promising big flavour before the beef has even had a chance to speak for itself. That can look generous. It can also be a very tidy way of changing the conversation. Once a steak is heavily dressed, the shopper is no longer judging the meat alone. They are judging salt, sugar, seasoning, colouring, moisture, and whatever else is doing the heavy lifting. That is why pre-marinated supermarket steaks deserve caution. The idea sounds helpful. Dinner is already half done. The flavour is built in. The mess is reduced. But convenience has a habit of covering over questions people would normally ask. Is the cut actually good? Is the texture likely to hold up? Would anyone buy this plain? Those questions get muffled the second the tray starts shouting. Marinade can also create a strange illusion of value. A buyer sees extra ingredients and assumes extra effort. In reality, those extras can make the steak harder to read. Salt firms the surface, sugar catches and darkens. Thick seasoning can give the impression of a more dramatic sear than the meat itself has earned. The result can look exciting in the pan, while the bite underneath remains ordinary, chewy, or suspiciously forgettable. On its own, that may seem harmless. Plenty of people simply like marinated food. Fair enough. The issue starts when the coating becomes a convenient disguise for cuts that would struggle to impress on their own merits. At that point, the shopper is not really buying a steak. They are buying a flavoured performance around a steak-shaped core. And once packaging and seasoning start collaborating like that, the next trick becomes easier to spot, because sometimes the misdirection begins before the tray is even opened. Number 4. Co-op irresistible sirloin. Colour still controls people in the meat aisle more than they admit. Bright red looks safe. Vibrant looks fresh. A tray that almost glows under the lights tends to win over one that looks darker or more settled, even if the eating quality tells a different story later. That instinct is deeply human. It is also one of the easiest instincts for packaging systems to exploit. This is where gas-packed supermarket steaks deserve more scrutiny. A lot of shoppers never think about what is happening inside those trays. They just see the bloom of colour and assume the product is in great shape. But presentation and performance are not the same thing. A steak can look impressively alive in the packet and still end up less satisfying once heat hits it. Sometimes the packaging is helping the display more than it is helping the meat. The contrast becomes even sharper when you put one of those bright trays next to a tighter vacuum skin pack. The vacuum-packed steak can look darker, flatter, even less appealing at first glance. That puts many people off, but the prettier pack is not automatically the better supper. One format flatters the eye, the other can tell a quieter story. Most shoppers choose with their eyes anyway, because supermarkets are designed for that first quick impression. That matters because modern retail is built around appearance. The steak has to survive transport, cabinet lighting, handling, and browsing, while still convincing someone at a glance. High oxygen packaging can help with that visual appeal. The catch is that the thing which helps the tray look exciting in the chiller does not always line up with what helps tenderness, depth, or aging character later. A product can be protected for sale and compromised for eating. Here is the part most people miss. Once colour becomes a marketing tool, the shopper starts buying with the eye first and the judgment second. That flips the order it should happen in. After the Horsemeat scandal, that ought to be familiar. The lesson was, never everything is contaminated. The lesson was, do not let tidy presentation carry more authority than it deserves. And once you take that seriously, another phrase in the steak aisle starts to sound much less impressive than it used to. Number 3, Waitrose. 28-day matured steak. There are a few lines in a supermarket that seem to settle the matter immediately. 28-day matured is one of them. It sounds serious. It sounds patient. It sounds like someone somewhere gave the meat time and attention. For a lot of shoppers, that phrase is enough to justify the spend before they have checked anything else. It feels like proof of craft. In reality, it can be proof of wording more than proof of excellence. The issue is not that aging is meaningless. Properly handled beef can absolutely benefit from time. The issue is how broad the supermarket claim has become. Once the phrase appears everywhere across trays of wildly different quality, it stops telling you what people think it tells you. A shopper hears maturity and imagines something slow, careful, and select. The industrial reality can be far more ordinary than that. The wording creates atmosphere. The result in the pan may still be average. That gap matters because it shows how easily technical language can be turned into emotional reassurance. The phrase sounds specific, which makes it feel trustworthy. Yet many buyers still end up wondering why their supposedly matured steak cooked up flatter, tighter, or less memorable than expected. At that point, the phrase has already done its job. It has made the buyer feel informed without necessarily making the product better. You can see the pattern by now. Packaging can flatter, cut names can flatter, marinade can flatter, so can maturity language. Little by little, the supermarket keeps giving shoppers reasons to relax instead of reasons to inspect. And that becomes especially cruel when the real problem is not some hidden industrial process at all, but a shape and thickness that set the cook up to fail from the beginning. Number 2. Morrison's thin-cut rump. Some of the most annoying supermarket steaks are not the flashy ones. They are the trays that look almost sensible. Nothing dramatic, nothing premium, nothing covered in sauce. Just a thin-cut rump steak that seems easy enough to manage on a busy evening. Quick in the pan, quick on the plate, no fuss. That is the promise. The reality is that these cuts often leave people feeling like they somehow ruined dinner when the product was fighting them from the start. Thin rump is an awkward thing to get right because it offers so little room for error. It can go from underdone to tough almost immediately. There is not much internal fat to soften the experience and not much thickness to protect the center from the heat. So the buyer ends up with a steak that seems to punish normal cooking rather than reward it. Maybe I left it too long. Maybe I should have rested it longer. Maybe my pan was wrong. Sometimes those things matter. Sometimes the tray was simply stacked against you from the outset. What makes that so frustrating is that these steaks often look practical rather than risky. They sit there as if they are helping the shopper save time. In truth, they often demand more precision than the average person can reasonably give on a tired weekday evening. A product that unforgiving should not present itself like an easy option. Yet it does, and plenty of buyers only realize the problem once the first bite turns dry and stubborn. That is not a small issue. It changes the psychology of the whole purchase. A weak product feels less weak if the customer can be persuaded to blame themselves. And once that trick becomes familiar, the final stop in the aisle starts to look even worse, because there the compromise is not hidden in a phrase, a colour, or a cooking challenge. It is hidden in the shape of the product itself. Number 1. Tesco beef stir-fry strips. This is where the whole performance starts to fall apart. Little sliced pieces in a plastic tray, sold for speed, sold for stir-fry, sold for convenience. Sold as if the hard part of dinner has already been solved. You tip them into the pan. They cook in moments, and the meal is moving before you have time to ask whether what you bought was ever going to eat like proper steak in the first place. pre-sliced supermarket beef strips are often where lower-grade offcuts quietly become a premium convenience item. The labor has been reduced for you so the price gets protected, but the actual meat can feel like an afterthought. Uneven sizes, odd textures, mixed-looking pieces, very little sense of what cut you are really dealing with, and almost no chance for the buyer to judge marbling or grain properly before cooking. The tray asks for trust while giving you less evidence. That matters because once the beef is cut down small enough, a lot of the usual standards disappear. People stop expecting steak pleasure. They settle for speed. They season harder, sauce harder, stir faster, and accept a finish they would never tolerate from a whole piece. The product gets judged by convenience first and quality later, if at all. That is a very comfortable place for a weak meat offering to live. There is something else quietly irritating about these packs. Because the pieces are already chopped down, the shopper loses one of the last useful checks they had. They cannot judge the full shape, the grain running through it, the quality of the fat, or the honesty of the cut in the same way. The product arrives halfway disguised, not enough to look suspicious, just enough to stop close reading. And that is where the horsemeat lesson really circles back. Not because these strips are secretly something else by default, and not because every pack is suspect, but because this is exactly the kind of product that benefits most when people stop asking detailed questions. Once shape, cut, and identity become blurry, the shopper is operating almost entirely on faith. After everything that scandal was supposed to teach, that should bother more people than it does. That is the real warning with supermarket steak in 2026. Not always some giant headline, but the quiet way packaging, labels and price can make weak products feel safer than they are. If you have had a supermarket steak that looked great in the tray and disappointed the second it hit the pan, let me know in the comments. And if you want more videos like this, exposing what is really going on in UK supermarkets, hit like, subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next one.